magandang gabi po, and maayong gabi, and imbag rabii. I think that's Ilocano. Again, welcome everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of Wild Brews. All right, so this is episode 2. This program is being brought to you by BCSP, that's Biodiversity Conservation Society of the Philippines. And the program is going strong so far. This program is all about nature and about the environment, about biodiversity. And I'm sure all of you would agree that experiencing nature or, seeing a marvelous species of, plant or animal, bird, a rodent, a frog, and of course, excavating stuff like that, fossils, or just simply communing with nature never fails to bring us to a happy place, right? And I think we all need that, especially during these trying times. So Wild Brew, this program is aims to do just that for you. Especially this is a weekend, you can just hang around, let your hair loose, like one of our guests here, and. Well, I can't do that though, but I can try. So, and this episode is being planned to be a weekly online gig by the society. And just to mention about the society, let me read my cue cards here. Did you know that the Biodiversity Conservation Society of the Philippines, or BCSP, used to be called the Wildlife Conservation Society of the Philippines, WCSP? And it's actually a professional organization of wildlife researchers, managers, scientists, students of biology, biodiversity, and conservationists. And the society is actually, it was actually formed way back in 1992. And in fact, one of our guests is actually a founding father of the society. And the society was formed to advance wildlife research and conservation in the Philippines. And we believe it has been successful in all this nearly 30 years now, so 3 decades now. And actually, before we continue, I'm going to digress a bit. I wish to thank the people who brought Wild Brew, the people behind this. So let me ask Cynthia, Layusa, Michelle, and Comienda. I'm sure you're surprised now. This is out last cue part. Des Fernandez, Giselle Belardo, Frances Tenorio, Luis, Abigail Dalayola Rizzo, si Khalil Panopio, Prime Premne, and Harold M. Nas. If you guys are around, could you turn on your videos so that our audience tonight can see you, even for 2 seconds or? Can you do that? You can do that.
There certainly are the ones.
Yeah, this is the surprise actually. Pero ayaw nila. Anyway, you'll be seeing some of them later on tonight. Because I think they have a special program for you, a song and dance towards the end of the program. Okay, so we are going to talk about 2 subjects that are not too familiar with many people. Well, a lot of people actually. And these subjects are biogeography and zooarchaeology. And for our guests, we have for tonight's episode, we have invited 2 guests, invited 2 scientists, extraordinaire scientists who knows a lot about these subjects. And let me read first who our guests are for tonight. I'm going to be reading their bio note. However, after reading your bio notes, I'll be asking you to, talk a little about yourself. Is that okay? Okay. Sure. So first is Dr. Janine Ochoa. She holds a PhD degree in archaeology from the University of Cambridge. Cambridge. She is an archaeologist by trade with a specialization in zooarchaeology, and she is a faculty of the Department of Anthropology from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, Quezon City, Philippines. And our second guest, and I'm sure many of you know this gentleman, uh, Dr. Lawrence Heaney is the Negaoni Curator of Mammals at the Field Museum in Chicago. He currently teaches and advises undergraduate and graduate students at the University of Chicago. His primary research interests is in the evolutionary origin, ecological maintenance, and conservation of mammalian diversity in island ecosystems. He is also one of the founding members of Wildlife Conservation Society of the Philippines, as I've said, and he's a board emeritus of BCSP. But actually, I also wrote my take on our two guests. I first met Larry, we call him Tatay Larry, LRH, back in 1991, actually, in the Northern Sierra Madre Natural Park. I'm sure you'll remember that, na Dinapige, or and for many of us, he is a giant, well known in the global scientific community. And yeah, actually, he's pretty tall. He's about 5'10" or 5'11". Anyway, for us Pinoys, he is a giant in biodiversity research, mammalian ecology, and biogeography. And for many of us also, we consider him as a luminary or a beacon, a beacon. And for Janine, I met Janine about 12 years ago. Do you remember that? That quite long ago. And when she was finishing her master's thesis, which is about fossils, right? Vertebrate fossils, or zooarchaeology of the Ile Cave. Ile Cave in El Nido, that's in the island of Palawan, in northern region of Palawan. And Janine here is actually a rising star in zooarchaeology, so watch out, for her name. We'll call her Shining Janine for now. So, and I actually need to introduce myself. My name is Arvin Diesmos, or Arvin. Just call me Kuya Arvin. I am a member of the BCSP since 1994, and I became one of its presidents from 2003 to 2006, and also became a member of the board. I'm a researcher and a herpetologist, resident herpetologist of the National Museum of the Philippines, and I'm also affiliated one way or another with the National Research Council of the Philippines, of DOST, that's the Department of Science and Technology, the National Academy of Science and Technology, University of Santo Tomas in Manila, and De La Salle University in Manila, and the University of the Philippines in Las Bañas. And I'm also with HerpWatch Pilipinas and Center for Conservation Innovations. I think when you grow old, you get to join a lot of institutions. So now for the game plan, basically we have three main segments. We will ask Michelle to put up on screen one of the segments. So, and then we have a set of questions, and we will ask Janine or Larry to talk about the subjects. So the first segment is about. Can we show it on screen, Michelle? The first segment. Yeah. So we have what is biogeography, what is zooarchaeology, and why are these relevant to Philippine research? Well, biodiversity research and conservation. And then segment number 2 will be cool finds and what do we know, stuff that both Janine and Larry have done all those years doing their research. And finally, for the last segment, it's about them. They will be sharing with us their life's lessons and experiences, some eureka moments while working in the Philippines or in other parts of the world. So there, we're going to start. We have a sponsor now. So this is there's actually some products behind me. We are being sponsored now by Worth the Health. Worth the Health, and they have this drink. Yeah, it's a beer. It's a microbrewery, and this drink. Actually, this one is pretty popular already. And they also, yeah, they were popular na sila na. So, and they also have a corned beef. Pero this is vegetarian. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I haven't tried it yet. So okay, so I guess we can start now. Again, for segment 1, let's ask what is biogeography? Dr. Larry Heaney, take it away.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I want to start by saying that I've been extremely fortunate to spend a lot of time working in the Philippines. It really is just a fabulously beautiful country. I've really enjoyed it. Been able to work in, not on all 7,000 islands, but on a lot of them, and have learned a tremendous amount and have been treated with tremendous hospitality by people. And so, I want to thank everybody while I've got this chance. So biogeography. So the Earth is a complex place, and living animals and plants and other things, bacteria and so on, are not distributed evenly over the surface of the Earth. Everything has some sort of limit to its distribution. The Earth isn't flat; it's mountainous. There are oceans. Things are very, very complex. So the study of how organisms are distributed on Earth, where they occur, and the history of how they came to be there, is what we call biogeography. So it's the geography of life.
Geography of life, the distribution of life.
Yeah. Yep. In fact, one of the very earliest books about vertebrate plant and animal diversity that was published about Southeast Asia was published in 1928, and it's called The Distribution of Life.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think we have a copy of that.
It's a great book. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Janine's turn.
Yeah, sure. So Janine, can you tell us, what is zoogeography? It's your turn.
Okay. Well, zooarchaeology, by the way.
Zooarchaeology. I'm sorry.
Sorry. So my specialization is in zooarchaeology, and we have a slide right here. Very simply, zooarchaeology or archaeozoology, depending on which country you're in. It's very simply, it's the archaeological study of animal remains. So in archaeological sites, we find a variety of things, of artifacts and different other finds. And so yung isang subset nun, we find a lot of animal remains. And so the archaeologists who specialize in studying those remains are called zooarchaeologists. So zooarchaeologists study whatever animal remains we find. So both vertebrates and invertebrates, and they usually come in the form of fossils and subfossils. For vertebrates, what usually preserved are yung bones and teeth, so that's what we commonly encounter. And then for shells, that's also pretty common that we encounter shells in the archaeological. So yeah, that's sort of the big overview of what zooarchaeology is.
So for Janine, so archaeozoology or zooarchaeology, are you guys doing detective work? Meaning are you dealing with living animals, or you know,
Ah.
or are these extinct animals, you know, the remains of extinct animals?
For actually, we deal with both because
Okay.
we encounter the fossils of what are extant, what are still living now. We encounter them in the archaeological record, but also we encounter extinct species. And as you go back further back in time, you encounter a lot of weird creatures. So yes, we
Cool.
both deal with living, yung fossils of living species, extant and extinct.
So let me get back to Larry. So is the study of fossils, you know, really also important in biogeography?
Absolutely. So, okay, so let me dive into some of the background for this for a little bit.
Okay.
I'll try not to go on for too long. If we could, okay, so I live in Chicago. By the way, it's autumn now, and my allergies are giving me trouble, and so if you hear me clear my throat, that's why. Excuse me. In Chicago, it's very flat. There are no mountains anywhere nearby. A big part of the reason for that is that this whole area was covered by continental glaciers that flattened things out. The most recent time that there were these huge masses of ice here was very recently. The last of them melted off only about 11,000 years or so ago. They peaked about 20,000 years ago. So in Chicago, there was ice more than 2 kilometers thick, covering everything most of the way to the North Pole. Enormous amount of ice. Okay, so the ice that formed here had originated as water in the world's oceans. It was deposited as snow, and when the summers were not warm enough to melt all of the snow, over the years it just gradually built up. Well, the water was evaporating from the oceans. So as the glaciers built up, sea level necessarily went down. So we know that about, let's say 18,000 years ago, sea level worldwide, including the Philippines, was 120 meters below where it is now.
Oh,
that's a
huge drop.
Yeah. So Michelle, if you could bring up that slide, the map of the Philippines that shows the Ice Age islands. Nope. That one. There we go. All right. Excuse me. So hopefully everybody can see this reasonably well. Excuse me. Hang on for a sec.
You need your brew, Larry.
Sorry, everybody. So try again. Okay. So this is a map of the Philippines showing the modern islands in dark green. So that should be familiar to all of you. That's what it looks like now. Lots and lots and lots of islands. Luzon up in the north, Mindanao in the south, Palawan off toward the left side there to the west, and Borneo is down there in the corner. The blue areas are the places that stayed continuously as oceanic waters. The light green areas are the places that are less than 120 meters deep. So those are the places that dried out and existed as dry land during the peak of that last glacial episode when sea level dropped to 120 meters. So there are a couple things that you'll notice right away. One of these, this is basically relatively new information that scientists around the world have developed about this 120 meter limit. So when you went through school, many of you will have been told that the Philippines was connected by dry land to the Asian mainland. We now know that that actually was not true, with the exception of Palawan. which probably was connected by dry land at one point, although quite some time ago. The rest of the islands are oceanic. They've never been connected to a continent by dry land. They're largely, volcanic in origin of one sort or another. Various kinds of uplift and volcanic eruptions and so on. So, so most of the Philippines is isolated. Well, that means that they're like the more familiar examples of for example, the Galapagos Islands that everybody hears about.
Yeah.
Never connected to the mainland. The Hawaiian Islands, never connected to the mainland. All right, but within the Philippines, not all of the islands were connected. So the map is a little small. It's going to be a little hard for you to see, I suspect. But if you were to look really carefully, you would see that, for example, there's a sea channel that remained open between Palawan and Mindoro, and a narrow channel between Mindoro and Luzon. The island of Luzon expanded out to include some of the smaller nearby islands, but there's a very narrow channel between southern Luzon and the northern tip of the islands that connected to Mindanao. Samar, in this case. So the islands within the Philippines were never connected to one another. Well, so that begins to explain some really important things. So this is pretty deep history. It explains a lot about the biogeography, the distribution of life in the Philippines. So with the mammals that I work on, particularly the aside from the bats, which can fly and so somewhat different patterns of distribution, the mammals on Luzon Island, we know of 56 species now that are native to Luzon. 94% of them occur nowhere else in the world. Not even in the rest of the Philippines. 94% nowhere else in the world.
Wow.
Even little islands like Sibuyan, for example, which lots of people have never even heard of. It's kind of north of Panay and east of Mindoro. It's marked on this map. It's more or less right in the center. Sibuyan has 5 species, has never been connected to anything else. It's surrounded by very deep water. It has 5 species of mammals that occur nowhere else in the world. 5. There are no countries in Europe, in continental Europe, that have 5 unique species of mammals. And that's just Sibuyan. So understanding the geography is really key to understanding one of the single most important aspects of the Philippines. And that is that for mammals and for lots of other things, including herps, I imagine, reptiles and amphibians, the concentration of unique species that live nowhere else in the world, the concentration per square kilometer is the highest in the world.
That's awesome. Yeah. So biogeography and, well, of course, zooarchaeology is about studying the past to understand the present as well, right? So and you talk about geological past. So how long of a geological past in time are we talking about? So any one of you could like how long would be quite significant for the Philippines?
So as far as is known currently, and this sort of information is developing, we learn new things all the time, but right now it seems as though the modern island of Luzon, the oldest part of what we now call Luzon, is part of the Central Cordillera up north of Baguio. And there are areas up there that have existed as dry land continuously for about 27 million years.
Wow, 27 million.
So they're real, these are really old islands, particularly as oceanic islands go. So the oldest islands in Hawaii are only 5 million years old.
Mm-hmm.
So these are really old islands, and there's been a lot of time for things to get lucky and float out here on a log from the Asian mainland. Very rarely, but apparently once in a while it happens. Once they get here, then there are lots of opportunities, lots of habitat, lots of food, lots of opportunities to undergo speciation, diversify, and become the fauna and flora that we see today. I've got an example that I could show you if you want.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so cloud rats. Michelle, could you put up that that branching diagram that shows the cloud rat group? Yes, that's the one. Okay, so all right. So at the right-hand side are drawings of what some of the members of this group look like. So the cloud rats. A lot of people are familiar with the cloud rats. Anybody who lives out in the countryside might be aware of them. Local names often is buot. They're pretty big. They're up to about 2.7 kilos. The one down at the very bottom is what one of those species looks like. There's another one that's pretty much entirely black. Anyway, these animals, this whole branch on the tree of life, occur only in the Philippines and mostly on Luzon Island. We've been able to study the DNA of these animals and to incorporate some information from fossils of related species so that we have a pretty good idea of when they arrived here and when they diversified. So the bottom scale on this figure is millions of years ago. So the common ancestor of these cloud rats arrived here, we think, about 14 million years ago.
Yeah.
So the history of the Philippine fauna goes way back.
Yeah.
And they've been
so cool.
diversifying since then. So we've got great big ones, the ones down at the bottom there, and the one immediately above that's labeled musromies. We might talk more about that one later on. Those are about the size of a house mouse. So the big ones weigh 2.7 kilos, and the little ones are the size of a house mouse. But they're all most closely related to each other, and they've all evolved exclusively in the Philippines.
Like morphologically.
So tell Janine. So Larry's telling us that the ages of islands, geological ages of islands, and the isolation, which definitely the older you get, the more important it would be for generating or the evolution of endemic groups of animals, like these fascinating cloud rats. Are geological ages of islands also, are they also important in your field in zooarchaeology?
Yes. So I get with regards to archaeological timescales, it would actually be quite recent if we compare it to evolutionary and geological timescales. The period of time that archaeologists deal with is the time where we see humans. So when we start to see humans in the fossil record, archaeologists sort of come in. That's kind of the boundary between paleontology and archaeology. So in terms of human evolutionary timescales, so for instance, in the Philippines, we are talking about perhaps the last 700,000 years ago. And I guess for Southeast Asia, we're talking about the last million years that we have evidence of hominins or human ancestors in the Philippines. And then I guess if we could show that slide, Michelle, on On Homo luzonensis? Yes, this one. So I guess in speaking about archaeological timescales and when do we start studying the fossil record for archaeologists? So we know from evidence from Kalinga province, no, in Rizal Kalinga, we have evidence of rhinoceros remains that have been butchered. So, and these were associated with stone tools. So this is indirect evidence of human presence in the Philippines. And the dating of that is 700,000 years ago. So here is some illustrations, wonderful illustrations made by Isa Domingo. The bone there shown is the humerus, sort of your funny bone. This and yung homologous structure niya is this bone of the body. But it's that huge in a rhinoceros, and that is a reconstruction of what the rhinoceros may have looked like. The evidence being shown there is what's called a percussion mark or a butchery mark, wherein the bone is hit to get to the marrow. So bone marrow extraction, yung evidence na yan. And that is our earliest evidence in the Philippines for human presence, for hominin presence, 700,000 years ago. In terms of
when was this published?
Sorry.
When was this published?
So this was announced in 2018, published in 2018.
So very, very recent.
Fairly recently, yeah. And of course, last year, the big science news that we probably also heard about, if we could go back to the previous slide, on Homo luzonensis. Of course, this was in science news before the pandemic hit. It was sort of the talk of the town for anthropology and archaeology. Itong Homo luzonensis, which is an endemic human. So really the evolutionary processes that we see in oceanic islands are just mind-blowing. So here we have another evidence of endemic human, this time on Luzon, no? That is at least 67,000 years ago. In 2004, there was something that was announced, yung Homo floresiensis, that's on Flores Island in Indonesia. Endemic human also in Southeast Asia. And then last year, Homo luzonensis was announced. So yeah, the curious things that evolution produces, it's amazing, fantastic.
Yeah, it's really amazing that we have rhinoceros in the past, and of course a relative, a Homo, or a relative endemic supposedly sa Philippines. No? So I need to ask you guys, any one of you could answer first. So I'm sure many of us are wondering, how do these guys, this rhino or the first humans, well, the earliest Filipinos, how did they got extinct?
Okay. That's an interesting question. If I can say, and then maybe Larry can add later, if that's okay, Larry.
Sure.
With the megafauna, so the megafauna like rhinoceros. So we know there's stegodon, rhinoceros, giant tortoises, an elephant, and also a relative of the tamarau. All of these creatures once roamed the big islands of the Philippines. The megafauna, the short answer is we don't know. So we don't know when they become extinct, and so we don't also know why they become extinct. There is this thing called faunal turnovers that in certain periods in the past, because of changes in climate and environment, there is sort of a natural turnover of species. But really, the intricacies of that, we need to further investigate. But as we come closer to the last 10,000 years or Holocene, and we start seeing evidence for our species, for Homo sapiens, we start to see that actually the impacts of human activities, we start seeing this affect faunal communities. So in many cases in the Holocene, we see extinction processes pero walang replacement, as opposed to in the past, there's faunal turnover, you have a different fauna that comes in, so there are replacements. But what we're seeing in Holocene extinction process, that's in the last 1,000 years, and when we're seeing a lot of different types of human activities that change the ecology of islands, it seems that walang replacement. So the animals just become extinct, and walang replacement.
Yeah. So siguro let's ask Larry this time. Actually, I have an echo. Do you notice that? My echo. Hello?
Okay lang naman.
It was there
Okay,
briefly,
okay.
but I think it's gone now.
Pero parang nawala na.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Okay. We know that Larry, is apart from being a biogeographer, he's also an ecologist. He knows about climate and vegetation. He studies that along with his colleagues. Has published a lot. Hundreds of papers. So how does your knowledge, our knowledge of ecology, climate, how do they how does it come? How do they come and contribute to a larger picture?
Okay, so I'll hit a couple of different things. So to go back to the question that you'd asked, Janine, I'll take a wild guess.
Okay.
Based on information that is only very recently and beginning to accumulate. So there's increasing evidence that during the periods of low sea level, when the islands were large, and
during the Ice Age, right?
during the ice ages, and there were a bunch of them during each one of those, when sea level was low, the climate in the Philippines may have been drier, considerably drier than it is today.
Okay.
So the islands were large, and rather than before, let's say 5,000 years ago, when there were people living in the Philippines, but a tiny population compared to what's there now. So mostly natural vegetation. Most of the country was covered by rainforest of different types in different places, but basically all rainforest. During the ice ages, it was drier, and so there was probably quite a lot of essentially seasonal forest. When it was dry enough at some times of the year that the leaves would drop off the trees, and there was more sunlight that would get to the grass and so on. And there may even have been places that were just kind of open grassland where there was a rain shadow effect. Mm-hmm. So these large mammals, so the elephants, the stegodon, which is another kind of elephant-like animal, and the Tamarau relative and the rhinoceros, those are all animals that live in, today, their relatives, live in these relatively drier, more open habitats. So it's possible that some of that early extinction took place because of changing climate and changing sea levels. So when the sea level was low and things were dry, they prospered. As the climate globally changed and it became wetter and the islands shrunk because sea level was going up, there was just much less habitat for them. And so it's possible, and this is very speculative, it may just have been, inbreeding, loss of genetic diversity in smaller and smaller and smaller populations that caused the extinction of some of these really, dramatic large mammals.
For Palawan, actually, we do have some evidence, some proxy climate and environmental evidence that during the last ice age, particularly during the last 20,000 years ago, it was probably drier and sort of more like what Larry was describing. So we do have isotopic evidence for that. Then it also seems to be reflected in the fossil record. That's something I can talk about in a little while.
Cool.
One of the things to keep in mind is that we think of the conditions that we experience during our lifetimes as being typical in some sense. What we see more and more clearly all the time is that climate and associated kinds of things change. It's dynamic. You have to expect things to change. particularly when people start messing around in a major way with things.
Yeah. So climate, yeah, the changing climate is a natural process, right?
Part of it is.
But yeah,
Part of it can be caused by human activity.
which is happening now, right? During our, yeah, that's the problem. Yeah. I guess I think people should really, be reminded of that, that climate change is a natural process, but humans have made it, worse or
Yeah. So right now, actually, based on, we shouldn't go into all the details, but based on the past patterns, right now we should be going in, should for the last 1,000 years, we should have been gradually going into a very slowly cooling period of time. It should be getting somewhat cooler. And instead, what we're seeing is this huge increase in global temperatures. And that is almost certainly due to human activity.
Okay. All right. So, okay, I guess we're going to move into the the next segment. But before we can do that, so you folks have established that studying the past is really important. Especially if you want to understand the extinct animals and even the existing animals, right? The extant animals.
Mm-hmm.
So, Siguro, let's ask Janine first. Ladies first. So, tell us about some of the findings, the cool ones. What we know so far about zooarchaeology, about your studies so far. So.
In zooarchaeology, could I just show one slide, Michelle, about the second image on zooarchaeology and biodiversity? That one. So in zooarchaeology, what we get from studying the fossils is we try to understand what were the native taxa that were present, which species are exotic or invasive, and which animals have become extinct. All the other like introduced domesticates, so like domestic dog, pig, chickens, etc. When did these animals get introduced? No? So these are things that in the last decade or so in Philippine archaeology, we're starting to understand more about these things. And to give some example, I'll give some examples from Palawan Island actually. If we can go to the tiger slide, Michelle. So, cool finds. Some of the cool finds that really quite unexpected actually. Unexpected, but not quite when you think about it. So tigers on Palawan, it may not be something that is well known, but from what Larry has explained, Palawan is curiously quite different from the oceanic Philippines because of its geological history and biogeographic history. So once upon a time, particularly in the last glacial period, there were tigers on Palawan.
Awesome.
And we first described this from Ili Cave. That's the site in El Nido, Palawan. That's the one in the northern Palawan, encircled there. But more recently, with excavations led by the National Museum in a site called Pilando Cave, ito naman is in southern Palawan. Malapit ito dun sa Tabon Cave, which some of our
yes,
some of you would be familiar with. No? So in Pilando Cave, we found more evidence of tiger, and this proves further that once upon a time there were tigers on Palawan. But now there aren't, di ba? And actually, our last evidence for the presence of tiger on Palawan is just around maybe 9,000 years ago. No? So just right after that transition from the Ice Age to the current period, that Pleistocene Holocene transition, after that, we don't see tigers on Palawan anymore. Tigers are actually quite rare, so we really just only have a handful of fossil remains of tigers, so they are quite fresh. And just to give another example, what we do find a lot of in the fossil record of Palawan is deer. If we could just show that, so deer. So there's lots and lots of deer fossils in the Palawan record. From what we know now, there is the hog deer, the Calamian hog deer, which has a relictual distribution dun sa Calamianes Islands, slightly north of Palawan. But once upon a time, it was also present on the main island of Palawan. And added to that, not only one, but actually there was two. We find evidence that there is a bigger kind of deer on Palawan, and this is more related to the deer that we find on Borneo, for instance, or on Luzon, yung Rusa Mariana, like the sambar or the brown deer. So we also find evidence in the form of antler remains and teeth remains, mandible remains. That once upon a time there were two deer species on Palawan, but then again they also went extinct. And medyo komplikado yung kanilang extinction narrative. Yes. So that's sort of the research we've been doing on Palawan. But more recently, if it's okay if I just continue on.
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah, more recently, from our research on Palawan, I've jumped to Luzon quite recently. And once you jump to Luzon, it's just an amazing fun. Like you just find so many different things. And if I could,
a whole new different world, huh?
Yeah. If I could just share yung mga buot, there's a buot slide. Well, ito yung site that I'll be talking about. No? It's the same site where actually Homo luzonensis was found, no? In a Calao cave complex, no? In northern Luzon. And what Larry and I have been working on recently are fossils of cloud rats. So Larry was talking about cloud rats earlier. It's just amazing that we find more more evidence for the diversity of these cloud rats. Just to give one example, the carpomies that you see on the bottom of the screen, you can see that it sort of fits in your hand, that species of cloud rat. No? Pero yung nakikita natin in the fossil record, we find a giant version of that. No? A giant version, almost 10 times the size of Carpomys peyurus. And to get an idea of the scale, Larry is holding a cloud rat. Kamay yun ni Larry, the one holding a Crateromys. That's sort of the difference in size, no? So a giant version of a dwarf cloud rat. That's sort of one of the things that, and there are more. But you can share that one. Just a fantastic fauna, no? When you get into the Luzon fauna. So those are some of the things that we've found out in the past few years.
This is for Janine. Just walk us back a little bit, no? So tigers were on Palawan in the Philippines at about how many thousands of years again?
So our oldest evidence of this comes from Pilandok Cave, and it's about 20,000 years ago. So that's right smack doon in the middle of the last ice age, no? Which we know it would have been a different kind of environment. So 20,000 years ago, and then the last that we see of it is like 10,000 years ago.
So they became extinct about 9,000 years ago.
Yeah, at the beginning of the Holocene.
And then is it the same story for the deer also on Palawan? And
the deer is quite it's quite complex. No, the big deer, it seems, also disappears in the early Holocene, no, just after that transition into the Holocene. So perhaps, no, Larry was talking earlier about environmental and climate changes. No, that certainly has a huge impact on Palawan Island. Even yung sea level, no, when the sea level rises, no, the land area of Palawan shrinks so much, and then the vegetation also changes. That we think those factors may have contributed to the extinction of tiger and big deer. But actually, curiously, the hog deer persists into the late Holocene.
Uh-huh.
So we have
Yeah.
records of it in the last 4,000 years, 3,000 years on the main island of Palawan. No? And so we suspect that this is a different extinction process that we're seeing, no, for the hog deer, possibly different from the big deer.
So, and the
And
hog
may-
deer also still survives, but
And it
not
still
on the main
survives,
island.
yeah. Not on the main.
Yeah, they're up north on
The Calamianes.
yeah, the Callayanas Islands, and those islands actually are pretty dry and pretty open because the underlying rock there is all just, it's upraised coral reef. So the water that falls as rain percolates down into this limestone very quickly. And so there's very little surface water. And so what develops is a rather open, grassy sort of habitat. So it was a tiny little patch of the right kind of habitat, apparently, that persisted, that allowed them to survive up there, whereas there isn't any of that habitat left on the main island of Palawan.
So you guys are saying that, well, based on your research, climate change is a natural process as well as extinction.
Can be.
Yeah. And then, what if you factor in the presence of humans, then what do you think will happen? So
for the fossil cloud rats that Janine was talking about a bit earlier, what the information that we have isn't published yet. We're working on that. But it looks as though the story is developing that they disappeared sometime between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago, roughly. They've been present since 50,000 years earlier. And then somewhat abruptly, they disappeared between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago. Well, that was the period of time when suddenly dogs and domestic pigs and pottery and various other kinds of things appeared in the Philippines. There was perhaps a new culture, maybe a new wave of people coming in to the Philippines. And that was also a time when it looks as though monkeys were introduced to Luzon. They're not native on Luzon. They're essentially invasive species. And it's the same time when probably, maybe, we think, the two civets that are widespread in the countryside. These are little carnivore animals, kind of that people sometimes call them cats, but they're not true cats. Anyway, these new predators were brought in, and it looks as though that is when these giant cloud rats disappeared. So that suggests that it was some aspect of human activity that caused their extinction.
So yeah, just to highlight what Larry was saying. So some creatures we think are native to the Philippines they are invasive species. And for us to understand the processes of when they became introduced and what impacts they had on the environment, we have to look to the archaeological records for that. And that's sort of the picture that we're seeing now, for macaques and palm civets. They may have had a huge impact on the endemic fauna when they were introduced. And then added to that, you have dogs now, hunting dogs. And then you have other ecological changes that Neolithic human communities were doing at this point in time.
Yeah, and that's really scary, considering that the Philippines now has 120 million, 110 million people. So
the human impacts go way, way back. No? So we think about our human impacts. Maybe in the last 100 years, we've had so much impact, but actually human impacts on the environment go further back. And we need to understand the history of that for us to better understand conservation and extinction processes.
Yes. That's why doing detective work like you guys are doing are really important to to see the bigger picture. So Larry, any of your cool finds? We know we know what you have like a 30-year career in the Philippines.
Close to 40.
Close to 40. So can you, well, before you talk about your cool finds in all those years, can you show us? I'm sure. I think Michelle has as a photo of you. Can you show? Can you put that on screen, Michelle?
So I at this point I practically glow in the dark. My hair is so white. But
how old were you?
As proof,
here,
this is
in this picture.
1984. So I was, let's see, I was 32 at that point.
Those
32,
glasses are
wow, a young Larry. Actually, Larry, you have a canny resemblance to Barry Gibb. Do you know Barry Gibb?
No.
Bee Gees.
No.
How deep is your love? Oh, love, how deep is it? Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, another.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about Larry. So, cool finds.
So discoveries. So I was warned. So I've got an example. So let me start by asking Michelle for that slide that shows the mountain and the different levels of forest on it, just to explain a little bit of the background. Yeah, that one. So most people in the Philippines live in the lowlands, and most live, pretty near the sea. So that's the way that most of us think about Philippine climate and habitat. But actually, the Philippines is one of the more mountainous countries in the world. In terms of the total amount of variation in topography, it's a very, very mountainous country. The mountains only go up to about 3,000 meters, so they're not huge mountains, but they're pretty big. So this is a diagram that shows the major different habitat types from sea level down in the lowlands up to the top of the mountains. And this helps to explain an awful lot about biodiversity and biogeography in the Philippines. So the lowland forest goes up to about 800 to 1,000 meters in most places. So as you go up into the mountains, things don't change very much for a while. But as you go up, everywhere around the world, as you go up, temperature gradually decreases. So the decline is about 6 degrees centigrade for every 1,000 meters. So Baguio is at about 1,400 meters. So it's cooler than it is in Manila, just because it's up higher. The higher you go, the cooler it gets. In addition to that, because the amount of moisture that can be contained in a gaseous state in the air is dependent on temperature. So the warmer the air is, the more humidity it can support. As you go up in elevation and the air cools off, it can hold less moisture. And so condensation begins, clouds form, and it starts to rain. So as you go up in elevation, rainfall increases. It gets wetter and wetter and wetter. So in the lowlands, the average, as a general figure, is about 2 meters of rain per year. Up high in the mountains, it's closer to 4 or 5 meters per year. And there are places where some members of our team have done field work that we estimate had, in a given year, had 8 meters of rainfall.
Oh my gosh.
So that's, as an aside, that's one of the reasons why the mountains are so critically important as watersheds. That's where an awful lot of the water that goes into the rivers comes from. Okay, so there are these changes in habitat as you go up. At about 1,000 meters, it gets cold enough and wet enough that termites virtually disappear. It's just too cold and wet for them. And that's where you start getting a nice thick layer of partially decomposed plant material, humus, on the surface of the ground. That's where you get a switch to places where there are lots and lots of mushrooms growing. So they're breaking down the stuff that the termites would have eaten down in the lowlands. Lots of plants are very, very different. So above 1,000 meters on Luzon, there are oak trees everywhere. You know, I've got oak trees in my backyard in Chicago. I don't think about them as being typical for the Philippines. And yet, anywhere you're up in the mountains, there are going to be oak trees. There are acorns all over the ground. So there are very different habitats as you go up in elevation. Well, the mountains aren't continuously distributed throughout the Philippines. There are big mountain ranges like the Central Cordillera up in northern Luzon, and then there are little isolated mountains like Mount Banahao, just down to the south of Manila. When a number of years ago, and I'll add a little bit more later on, when we realized that this pattern existed, we said, okay, we need to do transects from the bottom of mountains to the top of mountains to find out what species live in all of these different kinds of habitats. So we were doing field work on Mount Banahao in 2004. And at the end of our field work, 2 days before we left, because there's a typhoon arriving and we had to get out of there in a hurry, Danny Balete came back into camp with this big smile on his face. And Michelle, can you show the picture of Danny that I think you have? Nope, there we go. Okay, so those of you who knew Danny can see that excitement on his face very clearly, and this funny little mouse that he's holding. So Michelle, if you can now switch to the photo of the mouse actually in my hand. There you go. So there it is. So I've been doing field work in the Philippines for 25 years or so, I guess. 25 years. And I know these animals really well. And Danny knew them very, very well also. We both looked at this thing, it's like, what is that? Never seen anything like this before. So it's a tiny little mouse, about the size of a house mouse, big eyes, big ears, and you're not going to be able to see it in this photograph very well, but the whiskers on this mouse are so long that they would reach to the hind feet. And immediately behind the eye, you can see there's a little patch of bare skin. There are more whiskers that come out of that. This thing just, it lived in a penumbra of tactile information from its whiskers. It didn't need to see where it was going. It could feel where it was going with all these crazy whiskers. And the hind foot looked like my hand. Short, broad, and capable of grasping.
Grasping.
What is this thing?
So cute.
So
and they're cute too.
Yeah. So when we got our voucher specimen back to Chicago and cleaned up the skull so that we could compare it to others, we learned that this is a tiny, tiny, tiny cloud rat.
Cloud rat.
Yeah, that's what's fantastic about the Luzon fauna. Just blows your mind.
Yeah. So discovering new species is certainly one of the more dramatic things. I mean, it's an important part of the work. It is one of the things that tends to be particularly memorable. And it does have a big impact. And we can talk about that in a few minutes when we start talking more about conservation priorities.
How about you, Arvin? Can we ask you too?
Yeah.
You've had a bunch of discoveries yourself.
Yeah, but well, siguro one thing that I could say, like you guys, I've said, what's really, exciting about doing what we do, being a field biologist, whether you're excavating, looking for fossils, or being a taxonomist or biogeographer like Larry. The romance of discovery of science, all this knowledge, it really puts you into a different world. And second, personally, the more we understand about this country, the Philippines, the more we discover that it's really a beautiful country that it's really worth saving, saving the biodiversity and of course the culture. And well, I guess one of the, if I would share, Michelle, could you show that little brown frog thing? It's yeah, well, the thing is, this has no scale. Pero I used to have a photo of this guy, this frog, sitting on a coin, on a Philippine peso coin. This is one of the frogs that we discovered in the Sierra Madre Mountains in the lowlands. As Larry said, the lowland, the Paraca rainforest is very different from, the forest from the higher elevation. And actually, what's odd about this tiny guy? This is about 15 millimeters in size. This is an adult. This is a male, and I don't know if Michelle can play the call. I gave her the call, and it would. Yeah, let's see if she could play it. But actually, I was with Danny Balete when we discovered this in Palanan, in Isabela, in the Sierra Madre Mountains, and we thought that it was, well, we keep on hearing this sound, and we thought it was a cricket, very very high pitched call, and we all thought it was a cricket. But then when we started getting down on our knees and really trying to hear the ground, the humus, the leaf litter, then we saw this guy, and I guess it's discovering species is gives you a rush. I'm sure like you guys have said.
At that moment, Arvin, did you know immediately that that's something new?
Yeah, something special. Just like you guys, when you saw a bone or fossil or a cute rodent, you'll know by instinct that it's something special. And it's really discoveries are they are more special when you have colleagues with you, diba? So and you will definitely cherish those moments. Okay, I gotta look at our segments. Okay, so they want us to transition to segment 3, and which is, again, it's about you, but of course you can still talk about conservation, but it's mostly about you. But before we get into that, we have a few announcements, right, Michelle? And this is very important announcement. And actually, can I ask Larry, to have the honor of announcing this?
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate that. So, many of you would have met Danny at the BCSP meetings or have encountered him. He gave lots of lectures everywhere he went, very lively, really enjoyed working with students, interacted with people everywhere, enjoyed the things that he could learn in the field, as you see in this image, but also really enjoyed working with people and doing everything he could, working with everybody from the lowest income local people up to the wealthiest people, the people in government, promoting conservation and promoting an enthusiasm about natural history, which is often the basis for motivation to promote conservation. So Danny passed away very suddenly 3 years ago. Tremendous loss to everyone. In honor of Danny, the BCSP has obtained funding to provide a new research grant program. This is open to anyone who is a member of the BCSP, which anyone is welcome to join. It is, and let me look at the list of things here. These have to do with anything having to do with research, of generating new information, developing new techniques that contribute in any way to our understanding of ecology, taxonomy, biogeography, conservation biology, management of Philippine wildlife. This is the first round of applications are due at the end of October. And the email address there is shown. You can find that on the BCSP website. The information is very readily available. It would be a really great thing to see a bunch of particularly younger people continue Danny's legacy by applying for and receiving these grants and carrying on the kind of work that he cared so much about. I should mention, by the way, that one of the things that is important for people to understand is that absolutely anyone can do this kind of research. You hear about the kinds of things that we've been talking about today, and you may think, well, wow, how could I do that right now? Mm-hmm. Well, the answer is, I've been at this for 40 years. You do it for 40 years. You can talk about this kind of stuff too. Arvin has been at it for a long time, and Janine for quite some time too. Anybody can start doing this. What matters is getting out there and learning new things.
Yes.
That's what this is all about. Yeah. And Danny really exemplified that. He absolutely loved being in the field, and was better at learning new things about natural history than anybody else I know of.
Yeah, thank you so much, Larry, and for doing that announcement. And I think it's more special if it's done by you. Okay, so I think wow, it's been more than an hour of conversation. So we only have several minutes left. I think 15, 20 minutes left. Well, it's been great, you guys, talking to you guys. I hope, we hope, we can have another session or a longer session. But Siguro, before we finally, we end this episode 2, let's talk more about yourself. Okay, how you, for example, how you started in the Philippines, when. How you got into zooarchaeology, who influenced you, stuff like that, so that we can encourage more people, the younger people, so we can build an army of biogeographers and zooarchaeologists in the near future. So let's start ladies first. Let's start with Janine.
Oh, okay.
Tell us about yourself.
I thought it should be the esteemed Larry Heaney first, but I'll try to do it. Yeah, we do need more people studying this. Now, there's actually a niche that we need to fill in Philippine biology, Philippine science, now, with regards to paleobiology, paleontology, paleoecology. We need to fill those niches. And at the moment, some of us are zooarchaeologists are studying that. How I got into this is, well, as an archaeologist, I did an anthropology undergraduate degree. So my first experience excavating was as an undergrad. But really, it was in my master's graduate studies that I had more exposure to excavating, but also to studying fossils. I think there's one slide there, that one. So my experience studying fossils really comes from research from Tile Cave in El Nido. That's part of the Palawan Island Paleohistoric Project led by Dr. Victor Paz and Helen Lewis. And that's where I first encountered tigers, and that's where I first encountered extinct deer. That's a long-standing project in El Nido. Since then, there was sort of no turning back because you just sort of get hooked into it once you get to study these fossils. And like what I said, so this was Palawan, but then when you jump into Luzon, it's even it's such a fantastic fauna as well. That this is something I haven't actually told Larry. When I was starting to study assemblages from Luzon, I was expecting to just this will be like first fossil records of a lot of these extant fauna. But sort of lo and behold, it's really something you just have to expect when you're looking at the oceanic Philippines. It's just species that you just haven't encountered just keep popping up, not just the living ones, but also extinct species. And then more recently, we excavated in Pinando Cave led by the National Museum. And I think there's a photo of me holding a fossil in my hand.
Take a look. Before Janine, before we go to this, can we go back to that?
Sure.
The first picture.
Sure.
So that's you?
Yeah, so that's me. Tapos ganyan kalaki yung ngiti ko because we found 2 tiger fossils that day.
Cool. So that's how
that's
the yeah. I thought that was Kendall Jenner. So, Larry probably doesn't know it. Kendall. Anyway.
Yes. That's my contained joy that day that we uncovered tiger fossils, and just lifting fossils out of the ground that this is something rare and this is something fantastic. That feeling is really what gets you hooked into the study of Philippine biodiversity, both past and present. That's kind of how I got into it.
Yeah, the rush of it. So,
how about you, Larry?
Sige, si Larry naman, the sage. A lot of people are asking. Actually, they're sending chats. How did you get into the Philippines, and why did you choose the Philippines in the first place to study?
So life takes unexpected turns, and all sorts of strange things end up having an impact on what we do. So I grew up in Washington, D.C., actually in the Maryland suburbs of D.C., kind of out at the edge of the very rapidly expanding urban area. And when I was a kid, there were still old farms and crummy second growth forest that was within walking distance. I spent a lot of time outside and just loved natural history. So when I was a little older, I started working as a volunteer in the mammal division at the Smithsonian, which sounds like, wow. Very unusual. Well, in a sense it is, but people are great. You walk into most of these museums and to the university labs and you say, hi, I'm kind of interested in this. What you find is that people are more than happy to talk with you. And if you're lucky, you'll find a way that you can get involved. So I started helping people who happened to be working there at the time on a horrible situation. The war in Vietnam was going on at the time. Different topic, but one of the things that was happening because of that is that there was a U.S. Navy medical research unit that was doing studies of diseases transmitted to U.S. and Vietnamese troops by parasites that were coming from rats.
So these infectious diseases, huh?
Infectious disease, yeah. Yeah. Scrub typhus was one of the big ones, apparently. Which is also very important in the Philippines during World War II. So that these guys from the U.S. Navy, the Medical Research Unit, did a survey of the small mammals of Vietnam, setting traps. A friend of mine, his assignment when he joined the Navy was trap rats. Okay. So the voucher specimens that they collected, that they had to have to identify the hosts of these parasites, all went back to the Smithsonian. So I was a kid hanging around, and they said, well, you want to help unpack this stuff? So I got to see all of these mammals from Southeast Asia. And it was cool. I just had a wonderful time with it. I kept doing field work in this little patch of scrubby forest near my house and collecting stuff. And eventually, over time, gradually became more and more interested in Southeast Asia and things having to do with biological diversity on islands. So when I got to the point that I actually could start doing field work in 1981, I decided, well, I know some people who have worked in the Philippines, so I'll try that for a couple of years and see what happens. So Pete Gonzalez at the Philippine National Museum, the head of the zoology section at the time, was very pleasant when I walked into his office unannounced. Gave me great advice and a lot of help. Later on in the same trip, I went down to Diliman University and met Angel Alcala, who was a middle-aged man at the time. And he also was extremely helpful and encouraging. Had a great time, learned a lot, lots of new questions. We kept finding new and surprising things. And it just kept being really interesting and a lot of fun. Great people to work with. And that has just continued on and on and on and on. A couple of years ago, there were some people from the University of the Philippines who showed up at the Field Museum wanting to use our collections to identify some deer. And, this is good. This is great. Well, I kept in touch with them. And one of them, and I think there's a photograph of me with Janine. So that's how Janine and I.
Surprise.
Yeah. So anyway, these things just build over time. You learn more. You have a good time doing field work. The field work can be really hard, but if you like it, the fact that you're when you're out there in the field, you're sleeping on the rocks and branches and whatever, doesn't matter. You're enjoying it. Or you're working in the museum, in the office, and learning fabulous new things about these fossil and subfossil giant cloud rats. It's just fun.
Yeah.
And again, anybody can do this. Anybody.
And we need more.
I totally agree. Yeah, we need more people. Yeah. So, siguro, I want to know first, Janine, until when are you going to do what you're doing now? You think until what? I mean,
Probably until I die. I hope to be doing this. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably until retirement, but maybe until actually.
Yeah, probably.
There's so much to learn and to excavate and to discover. Because so we've been looking at Palawan and Luzon. We've hardly for archaeology actually we've hardly also looked into Mindanao, for instance, and the other bigger islands. There's so much more to discover, considering sa Luzon, ang dami pa nating na-discover. So, but yeah, I hope to be doing this for a while. Pandemic permitting and funding permitting.
Yeah. Teka lang, how many zoo archaeologists are there? Filipinos, Filipino zoo archaeologists working in the Philippines.
But there's a few. There's a few of us.
A handful?
A handful, yeah. There's a handful of us. There's, for instance, there's Noela Mano, who is based in Max Planck. He does fantastic work. No? And there's a zooarchaeologist in the Archaeological Studies program. Ayoko magbanggit ng maraming pangalan kasi baka may makalimutan ako. But there's not very many actually. And so we need more. No? Because for like zooarchaeology, there's specialists who do mammals and reptiles and birds and fish. And then there's people studying shells and mollusks. No? So we need a lot more to be able to understand Philippine biodiversity.
Yeah.
There's Taj Vitales in the National Museum. There's Marian Reyes also in the National Museum. So there's a handful now, but we really need more to beef up research.
Totally agree. So Larry, again, well, you've been doing work here since 1981, and siguro just give us an idea. Until when are you going to do this? Doing field work in the country, or writing and publishing stuff. I mean, we know, a lot of people know here. You've done so much already. You and Danny and Eric, all your colleagues. But do you see yourself still being active? In the next 10 years or 5 years? Or...
Well, my bones are getting old. Not quite ready to be excavated by Janine, but in the direction. So I'm not sure how much more field work I will do. I have accumulated over the years a lot of research projects that come with commitments to study and publish the results. And I want to make sure that I follow through on as many of those commitments as I possibly can. I hope to continue to visit the Philippines, particularly to get to the BCSP meetings when COVID permits, just because I love having the chance to talk with everybody, meet all the young folks, and be part of the community. And to work with people at the universities and the museums and all the rest. It's just great. It's going to wind down. It's one of the great things about this for me has been being part of the community that in many respects feels very much like an extended family. That's the feeling that I get from the BCSP and a lot of other things in the Philippines. And it's really wonderful to see the generations developing. It's in some respects, to me, it begins to feel the way that I do about my son. These are, my academic children. And it's really wonderful to be part of that. But for all of us, eventually you get to the point that it's time to pass it on to the next generation.
Yeah, very touching. So I hope you won't hate me for this, Larry. But if you have, if you're given a chance, to say something, to Danny or to Perry, before they, they passed, what would those be?
Oh boy! So those of you who are watching this know something at least at this point about Danny, even if you never met him. He and I met in I think 1989. Maybe 88, and began doing field work together at that point, and have worked closely together ever since then. um, as I have with other people, but especially closely with Heaney. And that was just a really wonderful thing for me to have the opportunity to work with him, get to know him well, and share all of the experiences in the field and in the museum. The great thing about the Philippines and the people who are doing things related to biodiversity research and conservation is that it really is a family of people. And I feel really, really fortunate to have been part of that. The other person who you referred to is Perry Ong, who I had worked with for many, many years also, who also studied mammals. He was at the University of the Philippines Diliman, and yeah, worked his way up through the ranks. He passed away very suddenly a year and a half ago. And he also was another one of the people who was just really, really good at getting people to work together. Really a tremendous networker in many respects. It's people like that who have a particularly great impact. But again, I want to emphasize that these are things that, you know, anybody can do. It takes a lot of time and effort and devotion, but anybody who's watching this is capable of accomplishing the same kinds of things.
Just
I agree.
just to sort of echo that, for in case we have listeners or viewers who are interested in zooarchaeology or paleontology, there are courses you can take, and anthropology and archaeology, for instance, in UP Diliman. But also join an excavation. There are archaeology. We constantly have excavations led by UP and the National Museum. Try to join an excavation and see how you like it. That's sort of a great starting point to get into the field.
I want to mention also that Arvin is getting to the point of being one of these very prominent people working, especially with herpetologists, training multiple generations and having a huge and continuing impact. It's been a great pleasure to work with you. We first did field work together in, I believe, 2000. So it was a number of years after we first met, but had a great time working in the field up in Kalinga. And it's often those field occasions when you really get to know people well.
Balbalasang balbalan.
Yep. Yep.
My first encounter with Arvin's research was because I love turtles, and so yung Palawan forest turtle, reading your research on the Palawan forest turtle was one of my early introductions into your work.
Oh, shucks! Thank you. Actually, Michelle, can we show the turtle? Yeah, that photo, the one with the rings on the neck. Yeah, so yeah, this is the Philippine forest turtle, or the Palawan forest turtle, and we rediscovered it in Palawan. So apparently it's endemic to Palawan, and yeah. However, you know, the sad thing about this, Janine, I'm sure you know, this has been the target of illegal wildlife trade for, you know, so many years now. Like we have a picture here that we can show you, Michelle, yung maraming, that one. Yeah, so this happened about, you know, 3-4 years ago, when thousands and thousands of these, you know, critically endangered species were.
Yeah, it hurts. It hurts.
Yeah, it hurts. So.
But we might have this is sort of can be like a cute little project. We might have fossils of that, Arvin, that may be worth describing. Fossil present now.
Cool.
Even look at.
Yeah. So, I don't think we can go on anymore. Okay. So, siguro, do you have, any final words before we really, end this episode? So, siguro this time let's start with Larry.
It's been great talking with both of you. This is a good, really good thing. I look forward to the next BCSP meeting. Love to see everybody there. Tell everybody who's listening, go out there and have a good time. Learn new stuff. It's really fun. Great.
Kendall? Oh, I mean, Janine?
Oh, well, thank you as well to the BCSP, to Cynthia, Michelle, and the rest of the team for inviting me to join this very esteemed panel, with Larry and Arvin. It's been great fun talking to you guys. And same as Larry, there's so much to discover in the Philippines, and so we have so much to rewrite about our history and our understanding of the biodiversity of our islands, of our country. So let's keep on doing the research.
Thank you. So, if I may, so I guess I also have to do it now. Siguro, again, siguro let's, we need to thank our special guests muna for this episode. Again, si Tatay Larry, thank you so much. Salamat kaayo for always being with us, for always helping us, the Filipinos. And actually, si Larry is really more Filipino than many Filipinos now. Well, he is as Filipino as us. So. And of course, si Janine, thank you so much. And we will definitely see more, more of your work and research, and we'll be inviting you more. And it was fun, speaking with you guys. If I may, siguro, for me, for the final words, one thing that I can never forget in doing field work is, like Larry said, and Janine, is being with colleagues, with other people, your friends, close friends, and just enjoying yourselves, discovering things together. I've been very fortunate to be able to do field work with people like Larry and Danny at the same time, in the same camp, and I would definitely cherish those moments. And I've been also fortunate enough to have done field work with the national scientist Angel Alcala. He's now what, 91 years old, no? Pero when we did field work, he was 70. So he was 70 years old, Larry, when we last climbed Mount Banahaw in Lukban, the Lukban side. So, doing field biology, studying Philippine biodiversity is really, it's a life changer, and it will, palaging sinasabi ko ni Perry, ni Dr. Perry Ong, na you might not get rich, doing research in Philippine biodiversity, but you won't get poor either. In fact, you'll get richer, with friends and knowledge and all those moments that you will cherish, forever. So, and siguro, to talk more about Danny na rin, siguro one thing that he told me the last time we talked, and was never to give up on people. So, yeah. And I think he's right about it, to never give up on people, especially, those you think you could help, and encourage and support. Yeah. So, yeah. So, Okay, how do we close this? Say goodbye, or do we take pictures, Michelle? Pwede na ba kayong mag-turn
Shout out
on
to
ng
the
video
to
or
our
what?
Shout out to our sponsors again.
Okay. So, sponsors. Janine, can you do the honor naman?
Oh, okay. Sure. This episode was kindly sponsored by Nipa Brew and Worth the Help, WTH. Nipa Brew is one of our local brewers. Shout out to Stephen Co. And they also do vegan vegetarian. So that's what the WTH. So thank you to our sponsors for this episode.
Okay. So, meron bang photograph, picture taking and stuff like that? Oh, I need to say this. Biodiversity Conservation Society of the Philippines is on Facebook. Like, follow, and subscribe. And for tonight's episode, it's a Saturday, so tell your friends about this program, and we'll be doing another session next week, next Saturday. And just visit our Facebook page, and don't be, especially for the younger people, don't be shy. Just send an email or ano ba, Instagram message kay Janine, or send an email to Larry. If you're interested about mammalogy, biogeography, zooarchaeology, do it. Just do it. As Dave said, anyone can do this anyway, as long as you have the heart and the passion, and of course, if you work well with others, and that's how successful can be. Okay, so I actually do not have any idea how to end this, but maybe we can end by. Do you have your masks?
Oh, I don't have my mask. They're saying, Arvin, for the next episode, they're queuing to us about the episode on October.
Oh, episode. The next episode is on October. Okay. Join us again on October 17th for our third episode. Same time, same channel, with special guests, National Scientist Dr. Angel C. Alcala.
Excellent.
So,
that should be exciting.
So, and
I don't have my mask on me. Mag-cheers na lang tayo. Cheers.
Okay,
So,
cheers.
WildBrews.
Keep safe and healthy, everyone. Cheers.
Be safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. And si Larry. Bye. See you again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.